When the original Luigi's Mansion launched to mixed reception, I don't think anyone could have guessed it would become a franchise that would sell over 20 million copies. But yet here we are, with the Luigi's Mansion series outselling many other Nintendo staples such as Metroid and Fire Emblem. This is the story of Luigi's Mansion, Nintendo's most unlikely franchise. The first Luigi's Mansion game actually began as a tech demo for Nintendo's new console, the GameCube. Shown at Nintendo Space World 2000, the demo was created to represent the graphical power that was going to be possible with this new system. But shortly after this demo, the decision was made to convert it into a full game. Originally, it was going to star Mario, as you may expect, but the developers chose to go with Luigi because his more timid nature would fit better in a haunted mansion setting. This meant Luigi would finally be getting his first standalone game. However, development of the game was pretty rushed, with a lot of content having to be cut and many planned features not making it into the game. One very interesting feature that was cut was a stereoscopic 3D mode. The game was designed with 3D in mind, but it was cut primarily because consumers just didn't have a TV that could support it at the time. Cut content and quick development time aside, the game still reviewed decently and sold well. Luigi's Mansion sold 3.3 million copies, making it the 5th best-selling GameCube game of all time. Despite the success of the game, it ended up becoming a bit of a punching bag from the fans, and the game does have a lot of flaws. The controls were janky at times, and there were some frustrating design choices. On top of that, the game was extremely short, but in the end though, what really hurt the reception of Luigi's Mansion the most was Nintendo's history. When the GameCube released in 2001, Nintendo fans had been pretty spoiled when it came to the launch titles of their last 3 consoles. The NES launched with Super Mario Bros., a game that was so good it quite literally saved the entire industry. The SNES launched with Super Mario World, which is still considered to be one of the best 2D platformers to this day. The Nintendo 64 launched with Super Mario 64, a monumental game that changed gaming forever. And then the GameCube launched with Luigi's Mansion. Fans were accustomed to generation-defining, industry-changing games on day one of Nintendo's home consoles. So although the game is certainly not bad, I think we can understand why fans felt pretty let down by Luigi's Mansion at the time. But for myself, I always really liked it. Granted, I was 4 months old when the game originally released, so as you may imagine, I didn't play it at launch. But I did play it many years later on my Wii via backwards compatibility growing up. I liked how unique and different it was from the other games in the Mario universe, and I thought the graphics still held up really well. I think as the years went on, people like me helped sway the conversation of the game to a more positive place. We weren't viewing it through the lens of a flagship Nintendo launch title, we just saw it as a cool Luigi game. Despite the positive trend in how Luigi's Mansion was viewed, I doubt Nintendo really ever thought anything else would come from it, and for the next decade, Luigi's Mansion sat dormant. The only time Nintendo ever even really acknowledged it was with the Luigi's Mansion stage in Smash Bros. Brawl, but that changed in 2011. Nintendo was getting ready to release their new handheld console, the Nintendo 3DS, and at E3 2011 they showed off a plethora of new games that would come within the first few years. One such game was Luigi's Mansion 2. It definitely came as quite a surprise to fans, but it was a welcome surprise. It seemed like a pretty random game to bring back to the 3DS. Part of me wondered, why would they pick Luigi's Mansion of all things to bring back? But if you've been paying attention to this video, you know that it's actually not very random at all. Remember when I said the original game had a stereoscopic 3D mode planned at one point? Well, the 3DS was going to allow the developers to finally realize that vision from a decade ago. So with that in mind, it's actually pretty easy to see why Nintendo saw Luigi's Mansion as a game fit for their new 3D handheld. However, one major change was going to come for Luigi's Mansion 2, and that was a new developer, Next Level Games. At the time, Next Level Games was best known for the Mario Strikers games and the Punch-Out reboot on Wii. So based on that primarily sports game resume, they did seem like a bit of an odd choice to develop a Luigi's Mansion game. However, Nintendo trusted them, and for the most part, Next Level Games was left alone to do their own thing. However, Shigeru Miyamoto did play a big role with this game as well. Throughout the project, Miyamoto would frequently visit Next Level Games to consult on the progress and push the team to be better. One employee at Next Level Games said it felt like Miyamoto was trying to use Luigi's Mansion 2 to mentor other developers throughout Nintendo. I feel like this approach is more common nowadays, with Nintendo and Miyamoto being more comfortable stepping back and letting other development teams take the reins, such as Next Level Games with Luigi's Mansion and Mercury Steam with Metroid Dread. But back in 2011, this was a lot less common. common. At some point in development, the game was renamed Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, and it was then finally released in North America on March 24th, 2013, nearly 12 years after the original. The game received good reviews and sold extremely well. Dark Moon was able to double the sales of the original game, selling around 6.5 million copies. This makes Dark Moon the 12th best-selling 3DS game of all time. I remember being so excited when this game was coming out. I really had grown quite fond of the original Luigi's Mansion over the years, although I was finding it harder to go back to as it aged. So to get a modern Luigi's Mansion game was perfect, and being able to play it on the go was even better. I can remember playing this game so much as a kid. However, for whatever reason, I never beat it. I had a bad habit of doing that when I was young, but despite never beating it, I still have incredible memories with it. Eventually, another Luigi's Mansion game was released for the 3DS a few years later, with the original GameCube game being re-released for the platform. I think this release is super cool just for the pure fact that the original Luigi's Mansion game is finally in 3D as the developers once intended. However, it was released in October 2018, which was that weird time when the Switch had been released but Nintendo hadn't fully stopped supporting the 3DS yet. In this era, a lot of Nintendo fans just weren't too interested in the 3DS anymore and really only wanted to play Switch games, myself included. Luckily, we wouldn't have to wait long for a Luigi's Mansion game on Switch. During September 2018's Nintendo Direct, Luigi's Mansion 3 was revealed, once again developed by Next Level Games. I think this was the moment when I realized Nintendo now viewed Luigi's Mansion as a franchise. I guess part of me had thought that the only reason Nintendo brought it back was due to the 3DS having the 3D capabilities. And I wouldn't doubt that that may have been the initial plan, but after the great sales numbers, they saw that there was a legitimate interest for more. The name of the game, Luigi's Mansion 3, actually represents this. It was originally just a placeholder title, but the decision was made to keep it as there wasn't such a large gap between games like there had been with the first two, and it could now be considered a franchise. One interesting note from development is that Luigi's Mansion 3 was actually supposed to be a Wii U game, but was moved to the Switch during development. I can definitely understand why Nintendo made this decision, as it's clear the Wii U was not savable and they needed to pivot their new big games to the next console. However, I think a Wii U Luigi's Mansion could have been great. So much of the gameplay in this series revolves around exploring the map and puzzle solving. Both of those things are perfect matches for the Wii U gamepad. Like I said though, it was the right move to put this game on Switch instead. Luigi's Mansion 3 launched on October 31st, 2019 to rave reviews, and it became a smash hit. The game has sold nearly 13 million copies, making it one of the best-selling games on Switch. To put this in perspective for you, that means that Luigi's Mansion 3 alone has sold more copies than the entire Star Fox franchise and the entire Pikmin franchise. Now, Luigi's Mansion 3 has definitely benefited from the Switch boost, and what I mean by the Switch boost is that pretty much every Nintendo franchise that got an installment on the Switch broke its previous sales record. I mean, Clubhouse Games sold almost 5 million copies. If you released a game on Switch, you were guaranteed to break some records. But that still doesn't take away from what Luigi's Mansion 3 achieved. This game has been in my backlog for a long time, but I finally got around to playing it as I made this video. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. There are definitely some faults though. Specifically, the second half of the game has some really head-scratching and frustrating levels and gimmicks in my opinion. But regardless of that, the game is super fun to play and the graphics are phenomenal. I actually think it's still one of the best looking Switch games to this day, and I feel like the characters in this one are so much more expressive than in most Mario games, which I absolutely love. Clearly, Nintendo was very happy with the success of Luigi's Mansion 3, as they purchased Next Level Games in 2021, officially making them part of the Nintendo family. On top of that, Nintendo recently announced that they would be releasing Luigi's Mansion 2 HD on the Switch in 2024, showing they remain committed to this franchise. Quick little nitpick, I absolutely hate that they're calling it Luigi's Mansion 2 HD instead of Dark Moon HD. I understand they did this for more understandable branding that falls in line with Luigi's Mansion 3, but it just bothers me. Anyways, that's the story of the Luigi's Mansion franchise so far, and I really do think it's an extremely cool history. I think Luigi's Mansion shows that first impressions aren't everything, and if you give games time to grow, great things can happen. I feel like developers are too quick to drop new IPs if they aren't an immediate success. I do understand that with the cost and length of modern game development, you have to be selective, but I just can't help but think of all the other one-off games that never got a chance at any sequels. Nintendo was smart enough to see that some of the backlash from the original Luigi's Mansion was because of many other factors that weren't connected to the actual quality of the game or the idea. Sometimes games just need time to grow, and sometimes an idea just needs the right new hardware to come along. I wish more developers could see that with their IP the way Nintendo did with Luigi's Mansion. Nintendo managed to take a lowly GameCube launch title that people used to look down on and turned it into a franchise that has sold over 20 million copies, and I think that's pretty special.